Since I was little, the family store was my whole world. I remember the first time my father let me stay behind the counter. I could barely reach the cash register, standing on tiptoe with a smile bigger than my own face. To me, it was a throne, kingdom, and I was the princess of the corner grocery store. I grew up among cans of condensed milk, stacked bags of rice, and the unmistakable smell of freshly ground coffee. While my schoolmates dreamed of beaches or amusement parks, my favorite place was right there, organizing shelves, helping customers, scribbling down orders in worn-out notebooks. As the years went by, the store became my second skin, and without even realizing it, also my first prison. When my siblings refused to help, I was the one who opened the store at 6 in the morning, who swept the still damp floor, who did the books at the end of the day, trying to understand why our profits always seemed so tight. They had their lives, parties, college trips. I had the store. And for a long time I believed that was love. "One day, all of this will be yours," my father would say, running his heavy hand over my hair tied up in a messy bun. "You're the only one who understands the true value of this place." Those words were my fuel, my invisible paycheck. While my friends changed jobs, earned promotions, traveled abroad, I stayed there behind the same counter, believing that sooner or later my reward would come. But it never did. Not when my father got sick and I took over the management by myself. Not when, to pay the overdue bills, I sold my old car without telling anyone. Not when Christmas came and instead of gifts I received a dry handshake and a hollow thank you. Still I stayed. Because deep down I believed that's what family meant, silent sacrifice. Until the day I needed them. It was a silly accident. A stumble on the sidewalk, an awkward fall, a fracture that forced me to use crutches for months. Unable to stand for hours, I asked for help. I called an informal meeting, right there in the back room, filled with the smell of reheated coffee and stale bread. "I need you now," I said, feeling the shame burn on my cheeks. "Just until I recover." I waited. I waited for them to understand. To remember all the cold mornings I opened the store while they slept. Countless shifts I covered without complaining. The days I put my own life on hold for this place. But what came was silence. And then excuses. "I can't," my older brother said. "My job takes up too much of my time." "I have my kids to take care of," my sister said. "You've always managed, right?" another one added, as if that were a compliment. I left carrying my injured leg, but more than that, carrying a weight in my chest that hurt worse than any broken bone. For the first time, I saw the store not as a home but as a prison. And them. They had never seen me as part of the foundation. I was just a convenient detail, now turned into a burden. That night, I sat on my living room couch with one of the old notebooks on my lap, the ones where I had carefully logged the store's transactions in small, neat handwriting. I ran my fingers over the worn pages. Each number was a day of my life. To know a piece of who I was. And suddenly I understood. I was expecting too much from people who had never promised anything. I was building castles on sand. I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I simply closed the notebook, placed it in a cardboard box along with my last bit of hope, and slept. The next morning, for the first time in many years, I didn't open the store. I only opened the window. Let the breeze come in. And with it, a new question. If not here, then where? I didn't know yet. But deep down, something told me it was time to find out. The following days were strangely silent. Without the store, without the obligation to open the doors at 6 in the morning, I found myself with empty time on my hands. Time I had dreamed of for years, but now it scared me like a deep abyss. I started walking around the neighborhood square with my crutches, trying to heal my leg and somehow my heart as well. I saw the same familiar faces, the old man playing checkers, the woman at the popcorn cart, the children running with colorful backpacks. Life went on like a train that waits for no one. It was during one of those slow walks that he appeared. A simple man, gray-haired, sitting on one of the wooden benches, scribbling something into a notebook as worn as my old accounting books. He caught my attention because, unlike everyone else, he didn't seem to be in a hurry. No cell phone in hand, no distracted gaze. Just a pen, a notebook, and a piece I had long forgotten. On the third day, our routines overlapped. I sat on the bench next to him, trying to hide the pain in my leg. He looked at me and smiled. A small smile, not invasive. "What did you break?" he asked with a rough but gentle voice. I smiled back without much enthusiasm. My pride. And my leg too. He laughed. Not a loud laugh, but the kind that carries understanding. We stayed in silence after that. The kind of silence that doesn't embarrass but comforts. The next day I came back. And he was there again. This time he brought 2 thermal mugs of coffee. He offered me one as if we were old friends. I accepted. And just like that, without much ceremony, we started talking. I learned his name was Ernesto. That he had been a truck driver all his life. That after losing his wife to cancer and seeing his children scatter across the country, he decided his time was worth more than the rush. And so now I collect slow mornings, he said, with the smile of someone who had understood things most of us can't even imagine. Little by little, I told him about the store, about the family, about the fall, not just of my leg but of my faith. He listened silently, only nodding from time to time. When I finished, he looked at me with a calmness that seemed to pull the thorns from my chest. You know how to work. You know how to build. But no one ever taught you how to choose who's worth it. I swallowed hard. We don't choose family, I replied a bit bitterly. He gave a small smile. But the life after disappointment that we do choose. Those words echoed inside me for days. Then he made me a proposal. Have you ever thought about opening your own business? A place that's yours, carrying your story without carrying the pain. I let out a skeptical laugh. With what money, Mr. Ernesto? I can barely walk. He shrugged, as if money were just a minor detail. I know a local producer's market. There's space for those who want to start small. Sometimes all we need is to take the first step, even if it's with a limping leg. That thought stuck with me. Following week, he took me there. It was an open-air market, full of colorful stalls, the smells of bread, sweets, flowers. Simple people selling what they knew how to make best. I saw something in their eyes that I hadn't seen in a long time, dignity. Not the kind imposed by a last name or bloodline, but the dignity that comes from building something with your own hands. Ernesto introduced me to a few people. He said that if I wanted, I could start by selling small homemade product kits, things I knew how to make but had never truly valued. Simple cakes, jams, preserves. Start small. But start, he insisted. And for the first time in a long time, I didn't hear the critical voice inside me. I heard the voice of hope. That night, I pulled one of my old accounting notebooks out of the box. Not to record debts, but to sketch dreams. I wrote down product ideas, names for the stall, ways I could decorate it with simplicity and affection. Felt as if, for the first time, I was drawing a future that was mine, not a forced continuation of someone else's dreams. In the following weeks, with Ernesto's help and small loans from some market folks, people who trusted me more than my own family ever had, I set up my first stall. It was simple. A faded blue canopy. A wooden table covered with a crochet cloth from my grandmother. And lots of handmade jam jars with hand-drawn labels. On the first day, I sold almost everything. People praised the flavors, the care, the warmth. But for me, the greatest sale was invisible. The sale of the belief that I could build something of my own, without waiting for recognition from those who never truly saw me. When I closed the stall that afternoon, with the sun beating down on my back and the sweet smell of jam clinging to my clothes, I looked at Ernesto, who was watching from afar, coffee mug in hand, and I waved. He waved back as if to say, I knew it. And I knew it too. The fall, the pain, the betrayal, all of that had just been the beginning. What mattered now was what I would choose to build from here on. And, for the first time, the choice was mine. In just a few months, my stall at the market had become a regular stop on Saturday mornings. People would come asking for the blackberry jams, the cornmeal cakes, the peach and vanilla preserves. I was learning every day about sales, about people, about myself. Ernesto kept showing up. Sometimes to help set up the canopy, sometimes just to sit on the usual bench and sip his coffee. Unhurried, like someone who knows the most valuable things can't be rushed. And it was one market morning, while I was arranging the jars on the table, that I saw a familiar figure approaching from a distance. My sister. The same one who, months ago, had turned her back on me when I asked for help. She came with hesitant steps, like someone stepping onto ground that was once safe but now feels unknown. "Hi," she said awkwardly. I looked at her. I felt a mix of emotions, hurt, surprise, a lingering sadness. But above all, I felt peace. "Hi," I replied, adjusting a jar of jam as if adjusting my own heart. She stood there, looking at the stall, the customers, the movement. "I heard about the market. Everyone talks about you." I gave a brief smile. "I'm glad." She bit her lower lip, an old nervous tic. "The store isn't doing so well." I waited. "I thought maybe you could come back. We need someone we can trust." That's when I realized. The invitation wasn't about love. It was about need. I took a deep breath. Looked around. The kids eating cake, the elderly praising my preserves, Ernesto watching from a distance with his quiet smile. I had a home there. New roots. And I wasn't about to tear them up to try and revive a dead tree. "Thank you for the offer," I said, my voice firm but kind. "But now I work for myself." She blinked, surprised. Maybe it was the first time in her life she heard me choose myself. She stood there a few more seconds, then gave a small wave and left. "And me?" I turned to an elderly man who wanted to try the corn cake and kept serving. No drama. No guilt. No weight. Later, I sat on the bench next to Ernesto, notebook resting on my lap. "You made the right choice," he said, without me having to explain anything. I nodded. "It hurt less than I thought it would." He smiled. "When we finally find ourselves, we stop losing ourselves for others." We stayed there, watching the sun set behind the colorful stalls. Days later, Ernesto invited me for coffee at the square. When I arrived, there was a small package wrapped in brown paper sitting on the bench. I opened it carefully. Inside there was a key. And a note. "For someone who rebuilt not just a business, but herself. This key opens the little shop on the corner of the square. A gift from an old truck driver who believes in new beginnings." My eyes filled with tears. On the corner of the square there really was a small shop, abandoned for years. Key gleamed in my hand like a promise. I ran, hobbled as best I could, over to it. The door creaked open, releasing the smell of dust and possibilities. I stepped inside. Peeling walls. Stained floor. A timid light filtering through the only window. And yet it was beautiful. 'Cause it was mine. Right then and there I started sweeping, cleaning, painting. Some customers from the market came by to help. Others donated old furniture, shelves, curtains. When we truly surrender to life, life conspires in our favor. On opening day, I hung a hand-painted sign on the door. "Sweetness of life, made with love and freedom." The little space filled with people. Ernesto in the front row, clapping loudly. I even saw some familiar faces. My sister appeared too, from a distance, waving shyly without daring to come in. I smiled at her. No resentment. No bitterness. Just acceptance that not everyone can keep up with our growth. And that's okay. That night, when I closed the little shop and tucked the key into my pocket, I walked across the square, lit by old lampposts. Cold wind brushed my face. But inside, I was all warmth. I had lost a store, a family, an illusion. And in its place, I had gained something infinitely greater. Myself. And now, no one could ever take that away from me. Never again. The following months passed like a beautiful movie, full of small moments that, if I wasn't paying attention, could have seemed ordinary. But they weren't. Every morning when I opened the door to the little shop and smelled the wood mixed with fresh coffee, my chest filled with something I could only call life. Dolce's de Vita became a well-known spot in the small town. People came not only for the cakes and jams, but for the good feeling that seemed to live within those walls painted with love. I listened to stories. A lady who lost her husband and came every day just to smell the cake baking. A shy boy who found the courage to tell me he dreamed of becoming a chef. Couples who met there, sharing a slice of cake. Each one brought a little piece of themselves. And me? I also gave of myself, without fear, without the need to erase myself to be loved. One afternoon, close to Christmas, the shop door opened and a cold wind swept in. It was Ernesto, holding a rustic wooden box in his hands. "For you," he said, not wasting time, as was his way. I opened the box. Inside was a small, resilient olive tree sapling. "Olive trees take years to bear fruit," he explained, scratching his neck. "But when they do, they last for centuries. I thought it suited you." I held the sapling like I was holding a miracle. I planted the olive tree in the small patch of land at the back of the shop. Every morning before opening the shop, I watered the plant. And while I watered the soil, I felt like I was watering my own roots, those that, for a long time, had been left to dry while trying to please others. Not anymore. Now I was growing for myself. Time brought natural changes. Ernesto, during one of those end-of-day chats, invited me to dinner. Not as before, as friends, but as someone who truly wants to walk together. I hesitated. My heart still carried old scars. But I also knew that some doors, if opened slowly, could lead to beautiful places. I accepted. And so, slowly, I began a new story, this time carrying no one on my back but myself. As for my family, over time, the wound became a scar. My sister and I met a few times casually. She still didn't know how to apologize, and I no longer needed that to move on. I forgave in silence. Sometimes true forgiveness is not what we give to others, it's what we give ourselves to live in peace. On the anniversary of the shop, I had a small party. Simple balloons, cornbread cake, orange juice. Customers came, the friends came. Even my nephew, that curious boy, showed up with a drawing of the shop with my name written in crooked letters. I cried with joy. And in the midst of the celebration, I looked at the small olive tree in the backyard. Still fragile but standing, resisting the elements. Just like me. A woman who had once carried the weight of being forgotten, underestimated, used, but who now bloomed on her own in the silent strength of the roots no one else saw. Before turning off the shop lights that night, I held the key in my hands and closed my eyes. I made a simple wish. May I never forget how hard I fought to get here. And may I always remember, even on the tough days, the house is mine, the dream is mine, the life is mine. I locked the door, smiled at the empty street, and walked home. Cold wind danced in the trees. But inside me it was spring. Forever.